everyone, Rascal here.
And Mama, welcome to our new World of Paws podcast.
Today we're discussing seasons 2 to 5 of Netflix's She-Ra series.
Now with She-Ra over, and we've already covered season 1 a while back, it's time we discuss the rest of the series and talk about how much the show has changed during this run and the effect it's had on pop culture and other types of culture.
Right. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, and click notification bell to get updates on future podcasts and World of Paws videos.
Yes.
So yes, we did cover She-Ra the first season a long time ago, around the time we recorded for Dragon Prince and Thundercats and stuff. And it had been a while since we got back to the series, so when we saw it was going to end, and we had totally forgotten about it because we were watching many other things at the same time. Yeah, anime, movies, while going to the theater and stuff. We had so many other things that was like, oh my gosh, we forgot we had She-Ra. So,
we binge watched.
Right. All the way to, a few days before it came on with the final season, and then the final season came, and we binge watched that in a few days and completely finished the series.
Yes.
And I gotta say, it was definitely different from when it started with season 1, as you knew it would be, all the way to season 2, and then to the end of the franchise.
Definitely. And it was definitely a different take than the original series that took place in the 80s. They wanted to make something different, and they absolutely positively succeeded. They had a few elements from the original, but it was just like a few similarities, but in on the whole, I should say, for the whole part, this was a different series altogether.
Yeah, I agree, because at one point you were watching and you said that it doesn't have the fantasy feel, a strong fantasy feel like it did in the original. It's there, but it seems like it's mixed with sci-fi. Like the fantasy and magic was converted into technology and space age stuff, so it felt like a whole different show.
Yes, definitely.
And then they also brought in where there were other She-Ras before Adora, so it was a whole lineage and lines of previous She-Ras that were supposed to defend the universe.
So it reminded us of Avatar. In that sense, it reminded us of the previous ones, and the connection that she had, and how she was seeing and not knowing who they were.
Right.
And then, learning that they were there to guide her. So
right.
It was a lot of shows now have the element of Avatar when they have mentors have passed on coming back to assist. It's just a trope now that's used in a lot of shows. Right.
And speaking of tropes, there were a lot of similarities to different shows and things we watched from DreamWorks or other franchises that were incorporated into She-Ra. Like, it still had its own story, but you could tell it had stuff from Star Wars, it had stuff from Avatar and Legend of Korra.
Voltron.
Yes, if you have not seen Voltron.
Legendary Defender.
Right. Voltron's storyline was starting to become really similar with She-Ra. She-Ra seemed to lift a lot of heavy plot lines, scenes, jokes, characters, a lot of stuff.
Even in 2 scenes, the exact same music from a couple of Voltron episodes that were used as
they're like background.
To accompany some action were the exact same scores from Voltron Legendary Defender.
Yes. And there were even points where they recreated scenes from the original show. I mean, if you watch Voltron and you get to She-Ra, you will notice they're like parallel scenes, like are almost shot-for-shot remakes. So we thought that was pretty interesting that they did that. We weren't sure if that was for a shout out to a good show, or are they doing something else because of how reception was later. But regardless, we thought it was pretty interesting that they even had so many heavy references in the first place. It was really jarring at first.
As you were saying, had more of a sci-fi feel, and I think that is why, because they were using so many elements from that as well as a couple of the DreamWorks creations.
Right.
They just seemed to take those elements and apply them to this show.
Right.
So I think that's why it had more of a sci-fi feel than a fantasy for that reason.
Right. And he also mentioned it before in our season 1 podcast that She-Ra was not going to have He-Man in it at all. While maybe people were expecting him to show up or give reference to it, they altered the story when they gave Adora her full backstory. In this version, there's no connection to He-Man other than Grayskull. That's all you get. She's from another dimension, and that is it. And she came here on accident. It wasn't that purposely taken to divide the siblings up so there'd be less power. She was there by accident, so they completely wiped out any type of connection or relation to the He-Man universe. They wanted She-Ra to be her own thing without his help. So that was pretty interesting to see too, how it started from there versus the version you've seen before where it was about them coming together. Right. Now it's just about her realizing her own power and being the hero without him.
Right. Now that you brought that up, I'd like to say one thing that was really interesting about this show is that no characters had backstories. When you got to all the princesses, you got to Bo's dads, you got to even She-Ra, Shadow Weaver. None of these characters had backstories. There were no backstory flashbacks. There were no backstory elements.
No origin episodes.
Exactly. You knew nothing about these characters except for what took place on screen. And for those who say, well, She-Ra's backstory is, tell me. Because as we mentioned, there was no reference to what originally was in the She-Ra series. They wanted no connection, and they achieved that. But they achieved that by totally wiping out everything about Adora. You know nothing about Adora. Absolutely nothing. You know nothing about Catra. You know nothing about any of the princesses. You know absolutely nothing about these characters except for what you see on screen, which was an interesting way to do a series. Because so many... when you watch animation and animes, and even live action or movies, part of what you're interested in is knowing how the character got to be, how the character is, where they came from, what events and elements help to develop them to be whom they are, whether they're the hero, or they're the villain, or they're just extras, as Bakugo says. But in here, there are no backstories whatsoever.
Yeah, and that was so bizarre because we were expecting it. The closest we got was who Hordak was and who Horde Prime was. That was the closest thing we got.
Still no backstory because they tell you, they were created, and they tell you that they are technological. That's all you know. You still have no backstory.
What about Shadow Weaver? How she became Shadow Weaver? That was kind of short.
That's no backstory. You see that she helped to mentor Glimmer's dad.
Yeah, she was Light Spinner.
Michael.
Yeah.
And you see that, but that's not her backstory. That tells you how she was connected to him, but you don't know much about her. You know how her face got injured, but you know nothing about any character in this series. You have no backstory whatsoever. There's no backstory.
Which is really odd to do in a TV show when you're rebooting something. For Voltron, that's the only thing that we can say is different from Voltron. Voltron gave extensive, long backstories if this was Lord of the Rings. She-Ra just says, these characters exist, that's all you need to know.
Well, see, like I mentioned earlier, most movies and shows give backstory. But for some reason, I don't know if it's because it was easier to write, or it took less time, or it was just the way she wanted it presented, so that you didn't try to make a connection to anything in the previous series. Again, there are no backstories for any character in this series. None. You know what events took place for Shadow Weaver to be injured. You know whom she worked with. You know she was connected with Michael. You know that she was connected with Catra and Adora because they were orphans. You don't even know why these people were orphans. All the people that were there, it sure wasn't an orphanage, that was with her. You don't know where they came from, how they became orphans. You know nothing. I mean, you know nothing as far as backstory about any of these characters. None.
That's true. And since we're on about the characters, we also discussed the relationships of all the characters with each other. Because that seems to be one of the heaviest points of the show, as we've seen from Wikipedia and IMDb and other sites, is that people really seem to praise the complex relationships, as they've dubbed it, between Catra and Adora, or Bowl and Glimmer, or Adora and Bowl and Glimmer as friends, the relationship between Catra and Shadow Weaver, Hordak and Shadow. It seems like they are praising it for it being not out of the traditional way of having characters, like in terms of having the backstory, seeing how they became evil or why they want to do this. It seems that's put in its place, and it seems to be okay because it seems like its audience is more interested in about the characters' relationships with each other. Are they romantic? Are they platonic? Are they good intentionally? Are they evil intentionally? Can they backstab? It seemed like that seemed to be what people were okay with without going into a story, which is odd because you think you would need both, but it seems like for She-Ra, it was okay because people were really hardcore shippers of Adora and Catra, which they did end up getting. But in terms of relationships, that seems to be the core component of it. And it's not like in terms of teamwork, unless it's to do with the best friend squad and the princesses. It's supposed to think like, okay, if they do this together, they do this together, they're going to get their goals. That only works apparently a few times in this show, but it seems like even then, the audience seems to be interested in only what is the relationship between this character and this character. And oddly enough, that seemed to be okay with the audience.
Well, I think, except for the names of the princesses and the name of She-Ra, or She-Ra as some people pronounce it,
right,
or Adora, and Shadow Weaver. Again, it seems like the main focus was getting you to forget the previous series.
Yeah. And
by writing it in the way that they did, focusing on relationships, no backstories and so forth, it achieved what it set out to do.
Right.
This series achieved it. And it made, in some places, the story was interesting in terms of the barren wasteland when they went there, and
right,
and all the events that happened there. Again, as you had mentioned earlier, having the Avatar-like predecessors to Adora, who were also She-Ra, who she was seeing and learning about. Shadow Weaver, and learning how it was pointed out she related one way to Adora versus another way to Catra. And the princesses, and seeing how each of them had these different powers,
right,
and how they learned to use them to work together, because they pretty much just stayed apart from each other until they were brought together. So those elements were interesting.
Right.
Before we go on, I want to give a shout out to some veteran actors who were great. Lorraine Toussaint as Shadow Weaver, Daniel Day Kim as Michael, Glimmer's dad, and you also had, there was one more, Marcus Shriver isn't a veteran, but he was on Blackish. And
Greg Griffin did some voicing too.
Yes, there was one other person.
Was it Lauren Ash or someone else?
No, Gina Davis. Gina Davis was, what was the character? Not Scorpia. The character who was really strong.
Was she guest starred? Huntar.
Yes, Regina Davis Huntar. Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually a pretty big guest star they had on there. I was kind of surprised they had her on there.
Yes. So, and I didn't even recognize her voice because I've seen her in movies and so forth. And when I learned it was, I was like, oh my gosh, it sure is her. So, we just wanted to give a shout out to those actors who are, again, who are well known, who made a voice acting appearance in the show.
Right.
So, getting back to the show itself, again, it seems like the point was to make it something completely different. And as we mentioned about the princesses, except for the names, there was no semblance to the previous series. So, for all working purposes, we're not even going to mention there was a previous series anymore during this particular podcast.
Right.
Because that's how it was intended to be.
Right.
So, it was interesting with also the relationship between Glimmer and her mom.
Yeah.
And her aunt. And them working on the premises that the dad was no longer alive. And there's no spoilers. The show has gone off the air. If you haven't seen it on Netflix, we're getting ready to tell something that's a spoiler.
Lots of things, actually.
Right. Well, no, it's not so far, but in this one we are, on the premises that he wasn't there. And her mom and her aunt had an interesting relationship in dealing with her. They were almost like two moms in dealing with Glimmer. And then Glimmer had her friendship with Bo, which she had for years and years and years before they met Adora.
Right.
And then when they met Adora, as you mentioned, they became the best friend squad, reminiscent of Team Avatar, with Glimmer and Bo and Adora.
Right.
And the princesses became more like, what should I say? They were a team, but they weren't part of the best friend squad. It was like a team princess, let's call them that.
Right.
Team princess, where all the princesses came together. They each had their individual powers and their strengths. And again, they learned to work together because before they were all separate kingdoms.
Right.
That didn't work together.
Right. And that's what I want to point out for, seasons 4 and 5 is when they really started to go all out for its story and its action, especially with them introducing Horde Prime. It's like you thought Hordak was pretty bad. You thought Catcher was pretty bad for her redemption. Horde Prime was the ultimate bad guy for the series because when they introduced him, he was essentially like a machine. He wanted to know all, see all. He was everywhere. He wanted like one of those disturbing chaos is order type of things, and seeing him was actually pretty intimidating because you were thinking like the Hordak was pretty bad, but even they were showing he wasn't completely bad, which is an element we gotta definitely point out for the terms of the characters gaining redemption.
But as you mentioned, Hordak Prime was the worst.
Right.
He was even worse than him. And he kept saying brother, and you were literally thinking they were brothers. Then you learned that no, they were all created, and that Hordak Prime had this weird Borg thing like from Star Trek going on, where he would connect his tendrils, and he could see through every single prime that existed.
Right.
So that was pretty interesting, I have to say. It was a different way of showing that that mentality, that connected mentality. And as you mentioned, he got a redemption. So we were talking about that as well also. That everyone in this series got a redemption but Shadow Weaver.
Which was odd. I found that a little odd because the way they had set it up, when she decided to defect from Hordak and help the princesses, it did make you think like maybe she's going to have some of that ulterior motive. But it never came. But then you thought in the final act, this was proof that she had changed. But then we get to the interview with the creator and said, no, her act was also selfish. She was never going to get redeemed in the first place, which I found odd because throughout the whole time, she had an opportunity to betray them and she never did. But yet she was never forgiven. She was never trusted by any of the characters. She was never given a second chance, and she sacrificed herself, and that wasn't even supposed to be her term of forgiveness, which I thought was a little unusual for a show where all the characters got redeemed and they were all bad guys.
I don't think that forgiveness was an element of this story.
I don't think
I really
so.
don't believe that was part of why they got redemption arcs. The redemption arcs seem to be based on relationships,
like with Catcher and Adora,
right, and so forth. And unforgiveness, unfortunately, seemed to be the message with Shadow Weaver. You saw that she really cared for Glimmer's dad. She really did care for him. You saw that in the end, she did care for Adora. She did care for Catra. And it's just like with a lot of other relationships you have, sometimes these complicated elements. But again, as you mentioned, she wasn't forgiven in the end. No one was even grateful for the sacrifice she made. They just said, oh, Shadow Weaver did this, it's over. There was not a sense of, okay, yes, well, she did what she did, but in the end, she helped us to win. It wasn't even there. And as you said, to hear that the writer, this was how she saw it from the beginning, that she would never let Shadow Weaver have a redemption arc or be forgiven.
That's a little odd, because Catra got one, and there were a lot of holes in that story. I mean, I know people wanted her to be good. I mean, they were cheering for her since the very beginning. And they were saying that, she was never bad to begin with. She was just emulating what they wanted her to be and thinking that this is what she wants, and it wasn't. She wants to be with Adora. And it seems like that's why people were really rooting for Catra since the beginning. They always knew that she was going to be redeemed, even when it didn't look like it was going to be it, which I thought was a little odd, but I guess I can understand why they would say that, because she was a fan favorite anyway. I personally like Scorpio a lot, because she's just like the nicest, she's like the nicest person ever in the entire show. Oh my gosh, I love her. But I can get why Catra was really popular, because she has all those types of elements that people like. Even, and of course the shipping with Adora. By the way, we support we're okay with the ship, but I think I ship Richard and Adora.
And we forgot to mention Seahawk.
Seahawk. Yeah, Seahawk.
Seahawk. And we forgot to mention Bo. I know in the first podcast we did talk about Bo already, but you also had Seahawk, who had this really bright and flamboyant personality, and he was in love with
was it Mermista?
Yes, Mermista. And it was so hilarious. He kept trying to prove his love to her over and over and over, and finally he proved to her that he loved her, and she got it. So I thought that was hilarious. But I thought when watching this, the point of all of these things that were going on was that I don't want to say it was good in everyone, but that people should get a second chance, and that just because they appear one way doesn't mean that's how they are, as you mentioned, because of life events and circumstances that happen. I was very confused what happened with Shadow Weaver, and even more confused when you told me that this is what the writer said. So to have one character that was not worthy of a second chance or forgiveness, and have all these others that were, it was a little confusing, because again, as I mentioned, Shadow Weaver, it ultimately was shown that she cared about these people, and it could have been because of the life events for her and things that happened, that she was that way as well. But again, we have no backstories to go on. But to have one character that is singled out not to be worthy of a second chance when all these others are.
Even Hordak.
It's exactly. So it's odd, and you don't know why she chose her as the one character who this wasn't going to happen for, because it's not explained. So you just have to wonder why this character was deemed unfit.
Right.
And you can't say because of what she did, because some of the other characters did things that were in the same category. But why her particular character? Maybe it's because she was an adult. When I think about it, all the other characters were not adults.
No,
we're not even counting Hordak, because he wasn't human.
Right.
So every character in there that was under the age of 18 got redemption, but not Shadow Weaver, maybe because she was an adult.
Perhaps. I mean, if you guys want to speculate on that in the comments, please let us know, because we're really confused on why this happened, when it seemed very clear from the writing that she was going to get redeemed, and she proved it, while then the creator says no, she's never going to get forgiven. So feel free to tell us about that.
Now, we did think that, and we still believe that this show is going to have a movie or another season or something,
because it's been trending.
It ended, and because Glimmer's mom was left in that area, and she's not dead. It's clear she's not dead,
right?
But she's just there, and she had to stay because someone had to stage take care. And that reminded us of Allura, of course, in Voltron when she made the ultimate sacrifice. But it just seems like it's primed for another season, or it's primed for a movie. And there's other elements that went on. For example, when they showed you future events for Bo and Glimmer and Adora and Catra and so forth, and you kind of want to see what led up to there. And they said, oh, we got one more adventure in the end.
Right.
So we're looking forward to see if that adventure ever comes to be in a movie or another season.
Right. Especially since it's been trending on Twitter.
Right. Now, we know you've seen this on Netflix, and we know you've seen the entire series. So let us know what you think in the comments below, including if you want to make clarification for us on why different things occurred as they did in the series. We always love getting your comments. We love explanations. even when you don't agree with us, and explain why. We look forward to that as well, because sometimes it helps us to get a different perspective and to understand more of why a certain show is loved, such as this show, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
Right. And we definitely want to say, like, thank you for bringing us a great show, another great reboot from DreamWorks Animation.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click notifications to be updated in case there is a movie or another season of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
Right. So, thank you so much for watching. I'm Ascot Entertainment.
And I'm Mom Entertainment.
Have a fantastic day.
Peace.
And reporters sitting flashing lights, trying to walk around, man, who the hell are you? What you wanna do? My man, it's on you. Man, it's on you. With her in my dreams, she was my queen. A castle in the mountaintops, rivers and streams. Plucking sunlight from the sky in my pocket, giving